Hello BookTube, and welcome to another weekly reading vlog. I've been working on 4 volumes this week, which looks very impressive, although some of these I've only read a few pages this week. But yeah, let's go through this quickly. The Histories by Herodotus, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and Through the Looking Glass, both books in one volume, so I finished off one and started the other. The Complete Stories of Oz, in which I finished off The Wonderful Wizard of Oz and started The Marvelous Land of Oz. And the grammar book. Let's talk about the grammar book first. So, if you've been watching this channel, you know that after initially making a good start on this book, I stalled out on it for several weeks. I don't remember how many weeks. Stuck on page 202. So the good news is I did make some progress this week. I finally got around to doing those sentence trees on page 202 that I had been procrastinating on for so many weeks. And it's one of those things, it wasn't that bad once I got around to it. It did take me, I don't know, about 15 minutes to do the sentence trees. And also, it's dangerous to pause in a book like this, because each chapter, the knowledge builds on the chapters before it. So the rules for making sentence trees I had forgotten about, which caused me to get a lot of them wrong, which isn't the end of the world. I just checked my answers in the back and then was like, oh, okay, these are wrong. Oh yeah, I completely forgot about this rule. Stuff like that. But yeah, these are some of the sentence trees I did out of this book. Sorry, this camera is going to show this in mirror image. Everything's going to show up in reverse. So you probably won't be able to make sense of them, but you can tell that there's something going on here. Some effort to make sentence trees on these sheets of paper. And most of these ended up being slightly wrong for one reason or another, but I checked my answers in the back and am aware of my errors now. So that is the chapter 10 negation finished up, and I just barely started chapter 11, yes and no questions, with more sentence trees here explaining the structure. And yeah, just up to page 208. So that's 6 pages done out of this book this week. But the important thing is I'm reading it again now. It's back in the rotation. Sorry, rotation's probably the wrong word. It's back on my weekly reading list. And I'm going to continue to try to keep gradually chipping away at it. I don't think I'm going to read a lot out of this book, at least until my life gets back to normal. Because professional development books I usually try and read at work, and I haven't been to work for months because of the COVID lockdown and stuff like that. But I will just keep gradually chipping away at it. And then I reread this week Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and already filmed a video talking about my thoughts upon rereading it. It wasn't really so much a review just as it was just me rambling on about my thoughts upon rereading it. And then I started Through the Looking Glass, which I have not read. I had read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, but had not read Through the Looking Glass, the follow-up book. So I'm starting that now and enjoying it so far. Something I felt a little bit bad about after my initial review of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, or the reread review, the video I filmed earlier this week, is perhaps I was harping too much on the negatives and not mentioning the fact that in spite of all the things that you could complain about, it's very easy to read. The prose is very simple. The episodes are short. It's very easy to keep turning the pages. And I'm finding that with Through the Looking Glass as well, although I'm only just through the first chapter. It starts off with a poem here, and again, I know everything's in mirror image, so you can't read those words, but it's a rather interesting poem to put at the beginning of a children's story. It talks about human mortality. It says, for example, the fourth verse says, "Come hearken then, ere voice of dread, with bitter tidings laden, shall summon to unwelcome bed a melancholy maiden. We are but older children dear, who fret to find our bedtime near." Yeah. And goes on a little bit in that vein, which it's something as adults is more and more on your mind. The idea that the time left perhaps is not as great as the time before, and certainly we are but older children. I think that's something a lot of adults feel, where you feel a continuity between your childhood self and yourself now, in spite of the fact that you're so much older. But I don't know, I feel it's a bit odd to put in the beginning of a child's book, because that's not how children view the world. And I'm not sure they're ready to view the world in that way. And I'm not quite sure what benefit it does to try to make children aware of their mortality. All that angst can wait until adulthood. I don't know. I found it was a bit odd to start that off. Then the next part was a chessboard here with all the moves that you would need to do on it, which in the preface to the 1896 edition, it says, "The chess problem given on the previous page has puzzled some of my readers." So he explains it. He says the alteration between red and white is not strictly observed. So it's not like one turn for each. But he says if you ignore that, everything else should work out if you have a chessboard to play it out on. I don't have a chessboard in this apartment, so I'm just going to have to take his word that the chessboard pieces work out. And then there are page numbers here. And I'm assuming the page numbers have been adjusted for this edition. This edition combining both Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass into one volume, where apparently the moves are explained. So I guess Through the Looking Glass has a chess theme, which must be all throughout the book. I don't know. This picture here, which doesn't seem to have anything to do with the action on the page opposite, but perhaps will become more important as we go on. And then we have a kitten, and this is, there are two kittens from Dinah. Dinah was Alice's cat in the Alice in Wonderland, who did not actually figure very prominently in the book. In the Disney movie, you can see more of her cat kind of playing around with her at the very beginning and at the end. But in the book, there's not really much mention made of the cat until Alice is already in Wonderland, and then she's always telling the other creatures about her cat. But the cat itself actually isn't... You don't get much interaction with the cat in the parts before she goes into Wonderland. But here in Through the Looking Glass, she spends a couple pages talking to the kitten before she goes through the looking glass. And then she finds that all the chess pieces are walking around and talking. And so she picks up the king, because he was trying to get on the table, so she wanted to help him. And she gives him quite a scare. That's about where I'm up to right now. Page 122 on that. So put the bookmark in that. Yes, then the Complete Stories of Oz. So finished up The Wonderful Wizard of Oz and posted my review of that earlier this week. I'm now on The Marvelous Land of Oz, which has 2 L's in this edition because this is published originally in Britain, I think. Although only 1 L in the American title. And you know, it's an American author, an American book, so perhaps 1 L is the correct way to do it. The Marvelous Land of Oz is actually the one book in this collection that I actually read as a child, just because it happened to be in my aunt's room when I was staying over at my grandparents' house, and I guess my aunt had left it from her childhood, and so I read it, and I had already seen the Disney movie Return to Oz, and so I recognized a number of the characters from that movie, Jack Pumpkinhead and the Mump, the Gump, I guess he's called. So this is, and as I said before, this is my second time attempting to get through this whole collection, which means it's now my 3rd time reading this book. But it's, you know, it's interesting. Even though it's my 3rd time through this book, I don't really have it on active recall. As I'm reading it, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that part. Oh yeah, I remember that part. But I never remember where the story is going. Just as I read it, it jogs my memory. The plot is really all over the place, which maybe is one of the reasons it's so difficult for me to remember what happens. But starts with Tip, the boy, who makes Jack Pumpkinhead as a way to scare his caretaker, the witch Mombi. And then Mombi comes back and she says she's going to, she's got this potion that's going to turn Tip into some kind of statue. Maybe it was a marble statue. Because she's sick of dealing with his mischief, and she just wants to use him as a decoration in the garden. And Tip says, well, I don't want to be a statue. And she says, well, it doesn't matter what you want. You're going to drink this and become a statue. Now, let's all go to bed so we can let this potion cool off. And in the morning, you'll drink it. So, of course, what Tip does is run away in the middle of the night. And it strikes me that's a very... Yeah, it struck me initially that was very lazy storytelling, because obviously this doesn't make sense. Why would you say to a boy, okay, you're going to drink this and it'll turn you into a statue in the morning. Now let's all go to bed and you'll drink it in the morning. And then you couldn't possibly expect that boy to stick around, right? You'd have to at least, like tie him up or something like that. But as I'm getting more into the spirit of the story, the whole thing is very silly, and everything in here is tongue-in-cheek. Like, every character acts in an illogical way. So I think that's the way you have to read this book, is just embrace the silliness of it. Otherwise, you may as well just give up, because nothing really makes logical sense. All the characters are doing silly things. Yeah, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens. Mumby has this powder which brings everything to life. So Jack Pumpkinhead comes to life. And then there's a sawhorse, which I don't actually really know what a sawhorse is, but I guess it's a thing you lay down wood onto to cut it. And it's like a little table. And Tip puts the magic powder, which makes everything come to life, on the sawhorse. So the sawhorse comes to life, and now it's like a real horse. And, you know, it's got legs because it was like a table, so they can ride it. And it's... I think it's true all throughout this complete series of Oz that there are all these magical creatures which are really not that imaginative. It's well, actually, I should take that back. Some of the stuff in this series is quite imaginative. A lot of it, though, is very ordinary. Like, it's just a sawhorse table that comes to life, or it's just a scarecrow that comes to life, or it's just a guy with a pumpkin head that comes to life. And almost strikes me as a bit lazy, but at the same time, that's part of the charm. Is just the willingness to be that silly, and just to have all these ordinary things come to life. So they go to the Emerald City, which is now being ruled by the Scarecrow, who is the ruler of the Emerald City. That was set up at the end of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. I'm not sure if that was the same as in the movie, but definitely in the book, at the end of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, they're all made rulers of different places. The Scarecrow is made the ruler of the Emerald City. The Tin Woodsman is made the ruler of the land of the Winkies, I think it is. That's where the Wicked Witch of the West used to rule. And the Lion is made the King of the Beasts, the ruler of the beasts. So they go to the Emerald City, where the Scarecrow is now the ruler. And the Scarecrow and Jack Pumpkinhead have some interesting back and forth. There's a rather silly scene in here where they both, Jack Pumpkinhead says he comes from a different land, so they need an interpreter. And they don't need an interpreter because they're talking to each other perfectly fine while they negotiate getting this interpreter. But they think they need this interpreter, so they get a girl whose name is, what was her name? Jelia Jam, I think was her name. Which I think, this isn't quite so clear here, but I think this is the girl who was in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, who was showing them to their rooms in the Emerald City and didn't have any name in that part. There were a few characters in the original Wonderful Wizard of Oz that didn't have names. There was like the soldier guarding the Emerald City, and then there's a girl who was showing them to their rooms in the Emerald City. And they later will get names as the series progresses. Excuse me. And then there's the Revolt of the Girls. And this is where this book has not aged so well. At least in terms of its politically incorrectness. Because it's a bunch of girls who want to take over the Emerald City because emeralds are pretty. And girls like pretty stuff. And so, and then throughout, there are just all these stereotypes about these girls, about how they're always chatting to each other and not listening. Yeah, it's just a bunch of outdated stereotypes about girls, which you would not publish today. On the other hand, though, I believe that these stories were well received by girls when it was first published. I mean, L. Frank Baum was a male writer, but I think the female audience for the Oz stories was substantial, right? It was. In fact, I don't know. I've not researched this. This is just my impression. But my impression is that these books were maybe even more popular with girls than with boys. Maybe boys were reading more adventure type stuff. I don't know. I'm gonna have to leave it there because I want to save a little bit of time to talk about Herodotus. So, still on book 3 in Herodotus this week, and I've read in this translation by Tom Holland from page 226 to 244. So, 226, right where I left it last week, is picking up on this exciting plot. So, the ruler of Persia, Cambyses, was struck down by some kind of accident. He was jumping on his horse, and he stabbed himself with his own sword, and the wound got infected, and he died. And his brother is already dead because he gave secret orders to kill his brother. But because those orders were secret, nobody else knew about them. So two Magians are able to pretend to be the king of Persia, pretend to be Cambyses' brother. And one of them apparently looked enough like the brother to pull it off. But there's a group of 7 Persian nobles that have gotten suspicious of this and have decided to launch a plan to overthrow these 2 Magians who are impersonating the dead king of Persia. And right on page 226, actually, there's a battle scene. I've been reading this book. I've been listening to Dan Carlin's podcast on the Persian Empire, King of Kings. And Dan Carlin actually references this passage from Herodotus and says, this is like a screenwriter. He says it's probably all made up, but you can see how this is designed to just thrill the audience. And he said, Dan Carlin also says that there's a theory among historians that Herodotus's book was not made to be read. It was made to be performed live. So Herodotus would have been reading this out to the crowd. So it talks about how the 7 are running into the courtyard, and the 2 Magians are inside, and there's a battle, the 2 sides against each other. So one of the Magians picks up his bow and arrow, but he's so hard-pressed by the other 7 that he can't get a chance to draw the bow, and his weapon is no use. The other Magian picks up a spear to defend him, and he sticks one of the 7 in the thigh, the other one in the eye. Neither wound was fatal, although one of them did lose an eye. Then the other one, the one who can't use his bow and arrows, runs down the hallway into the bedroom. He's going to try and shut the door to keep them out. But 2 of the 7, Darius and Gobryas, manage to get into the room with him. So Gobryas grabs them, and they're grappling with each other. And Darius has a sword. I I think it's a sword. But he's too afraid to strike because he doesn't want to hit his friend. Yeah, I am worried, said Darius, in case I hit you. And then the other one says, strike with your sword, even if you run us both through. So Darius struck with his dagger and somehow managed to kill the Magian alone. So yeah, there's that great climactic fight. And then once the two imposters are killed, then there's a debate about what form of government should come next. And this apparently, according to the footnotes, is famous. It's called like the debate of the Persians, or sometimes it's called like the Persian Grandees debate. I looked this up on Google to see if it was, famous enough to have its own Wikipedia page. And it's not, but there are like articles published on it, most of which you can't access because they're in JSTOR behind the paywall that you have to pay to access any academic articles. But there does seem to be some stuff, a lot of stuff written on this debate. So what's interesting about this is the first noble to speak is a guy named Otanes, if I'm pronouncing that right. And he gives a speech saying everything that's wrong with the monarchy, everything that's wrong with putting the power into the hands of one person. And it's a speech that's coming out of the mouth of a Persian, but of course it's the Greek guy Herodotus who wrote the whole thing. So you can imagine this maybe, or I certainly imagined it as anti-monarchical propaganda being written by the democratic Greeks, Herodotus in this case. And it comes through quite strongly. Which made me think, it's interesting to think that this was written 2,500 years ago. And all the years since then that we've had emperors in Rome and kings in Europe, and all these years and years of absolute monarchs and absolute rulers, when you had this clear denunciation of all the things that can go wrong with having absolute rulers in the literature, Herodotus has never gone out of print, right? He's always been. I know there was that long stretch in the Middle Ages when none of the peasants were allowed to read, which presumably because they didn't want them to read what Herodotus was saying about how bad kings are. Way back in 500 BC. Now, it is a debate. So the next guy who stands up says, okay, I agree what he says about how bad kings are, but he's like, giving control to the masses is not a good idea either, because the masses of people are going to do a bunch of stupid things. And then the third person, and then he says, what we need actually is not popular control, not popular democracy, but we don't want a king either. So what we need is an oligarchy. And then the last guy to speak is Darius. And he says, well, you made a good point about how stupid democracy is. But let me talk about the dangers of oligarchy and then why we need a strong monarch. And essentially his argument for monarchy is, if you have a good monarch, then that's the best possible world, because you've got a guy who knows what needs to be done and can get things done. Where with the oligarchy or democracy, it's just very hard to get things done. Which is something we certainly can bear witness to in this modern world. But nonetheless, my sympathies are all for the character advocating democracy. So the character who advocates democracy actually does not win that debate. Nonetheless, I get the impression that Herodotus's sympathies were for that character, even though he doesn't win. Anyways, I've got to stop talking because it's 30 minutes now, and I've got a self-imposed limit of 30 minutes on these weekly reading vlogs. So that's all for this week. I'll catch you next week.